What happens when two corrupt cops arrest an innocent man, leading to his brother taking matters into his own hands? This is the gripping story of a determined man who, after years of injustice, decides to turn the tables on those who abused their power. As the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the streets of Ashwick, Carter drove steadily through the quiet roads, his thoughts swirling. The faint hum of his car engine was the only sound until the sudden flash of red and blue lights exploded in his rearview mirror. He glanced at the lights, his jaw tightening momentarily before he exhaled and pulled over to the side of the road. The police cruiser stopped behind him, and Carter adjusted his rearview mirror to catch the reflection of the two officers stepping out. Officer Frank Bennett moved with exaggerated authority, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon, while his partner, Officer Ethan Carter, trailed behind, quieter but no less complicit. Carter's heartbeat remained steady as he reached under the dashboard, pressing a hidden button to activate the concealed cameras in his vehicle. Months of preparation had led to this moment, and he wasn't about to falter. He needed to do this for Luke, his younger brother, who had been wrongfully arrested and sentenced because of these same officers. Frank approached the driver's side window, his sunglasses reflecting Carter's calm but unyielding gaze. "Afternoon," Frank said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You know why I stopped you?" Carter kept his hands on the steering wheel, his voice calm. "No, sir. Care to explain?" Frank smirked. "Broken tail light, and you were driving a little erratically. Mind telling me where you're headed in such a hurry?" "Just heading home," Carter replied evenly. "Didn't realize I had a broken tail light. Yeah, we'll see about that." Frank's grin widened. "License and registration." Carter complied, his movements deliberate and composed. The officers didn't realize every word, every action was being recorded. Frank examined Carter's documents, then gestured toward his partner, who was already circling to the passenger side of the vehicle. Ethan opened the door without asking, rifling through the glove compartment as papers fluttered to the floor. "What are you doing?" Carter's voice carried an edge, but his tone remained measured. Frank leaned closer to the window. "You don't get to ask questions, pal. Step out of the car." Carter hesitated for a fraction of a second, then unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. He stepped out with deliberate care, his hands visible. Frank smirked again, clearly enjoying his perceived control. "Hands on the hood," Frank ordered. "Let's keep this simple." Carter complied, placing his palms flat on the warm metal of the hood. Ethan continued searching the car, his movements quick and careless, while Frank circled like a predator. Moments later, Ethan emerged holding a small bag. "Bingo," Ethan called out, tossing it to Frank, who held it up like a trophy. "Well, well, well. Care to explain this?" Frank's grin was triumphant as he waved the bag in front of Carter. Carter's expression didn't waver. "I don't know what that is." "Of course, you don't," Frank sneered. "Same old story. Not mine. Don't know how it got there. Classic." Carter's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Inside, he knew the officer was sealing their fate with every lie. Frank pushed him roughly against the hood and cuffed his hands behind his back, his voice dripping with mockery. "You should have just kept driving. Now you're going to see what happens when you mess with the wrong people." The ride to the station was tense. Carter sat silently in the back seat, the weight of the cuffs digging into his wrists. Frank glanced at him through the rearview mirror, his smirk ever present. "Awfully quiet back there. Starting to realize how bad you screwed up," Ethan chuckled from the passenger seat. "Or maybe he's rehearsing his excuses." Carter's gaze shifted to the window, his reflection calm but determined. The recording equipment was transmitting everything in real time to a secure server. By now, the footage was safe in the hands of his closest ally, and soon it would be shared with the world. At the station, Carter was processed with deliberate slowness, every step of the way punctuated by snide remarks from the officers. Frank leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "You'll be here for a while, so get comfortable." Hours later, Carter sat alone in a holding cell, his mind racing. He thought of Luke's trial 2 years ago, the smug look on Frank's face as he testified, lying through his teeth. He thought of his mother's tears and the despair that had hung over their family like a dark cloud. But now, the tide was turning. The station's phone rang, and Carter heard the rising tension in the officers' voices as they answered. Frank's confident tone faltered as the caller's words sunk in. He slammed the phone down and turned to Ethan, his expression furious. "The video's out." "What video?" Ethan's voice trembled slightly. Frank shot a glare toward the holding cell. "His damn car. It was rigged." Ethan's face paled. "What do we do?" "We'll figure it out," Frank snapped, though his voice betrayed his panic. "Damage control." The damage, however, was already done. By the time Carter's lawyer arrived, the footage had gone viral. News outlets were running the story, the public's outrage growing by the minute. Carter walked out of the station with his head held high, the officers' angry glares burning into his back. The following days were a whirlwind of interviews and investigations. Luke's case was reopened, along with dozens of others connected to Frank and Ethan. Former victims came forward, their voices finally heard. The officers were suspended, their actions under intense scrutiny. Carter's determination had shattered the illusion of their untouchable authority. Months later, as the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Carter sat with his lawyer, surrounded by supporters. Frank and Ethan sat at the defense table, their smugness replaced with visible tension. The prosecution presented the footage, the jury's expressions shifting from shock to anger as they watched. Witnesses testified, painting a damning picture of corruption and abuse. When Carter took the stand, he spoke with clarity and conviction. He described the moment he decided to fight back, the years of pain his family had endured, and his determination to ensure no one else suffered the same fate. The defense's attempts to discredit him fell flat, their arguments crumbling under the weight of the evidence. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. Frank and Ethan were sentenced to years in prison, their badges stripped, their reputations destroyed. As Carter left the courthouse, a wave of relief washed over him. The fight had been long and arduous, but justice had prevailed. Luke was released days later, his record cleared. Standing on the courthouse steps with his brother, Carter finally allowed himself to breathe. The system had failed them, but they had fought back and won. Together, they faced the crowd of supporters, their voices united in a single chant. Justice had been served. As the sun set over Ashwick, Carter and Luke walked away from the courthouse, ready to rebuild their lives and continue the fight for those who couldn't.